The first ever console I remember playing was a Famiclone. For those of you unaware, it is a bootleg of the Nintendo Famicom, also known as the NES in Americas and Europe. What's worse, I only played on a Famiclone, but never owned one. This situation has to change right now. This unit I got from eBay. I specifically searched for an untouched console, for various reasons. Visually, it is in a pretty good shape, just a little dirty on the outside, with a strange video sticker. And what NES has to offer exactly? In most parts, it is a composite video quality and mono sound. I do have an RGB capable monitor, so naturally, I'd like to have an RGB or at least an S-video signal. This is where the NES RGB mod comes into play. I will be installing version 4.2 of it. I also remember possibly the first game I ever played in my life. It was Darkwing Duck. I remember that I was terrible at gaming and never beat even the first level. I will fix that too, hopefully, but only after I dealt with the blinking red light. Now none of the games could be played. And I plan to do this without changing the cartridge slot, but we will talk about it a bit later. Let's get started from the basic maintenance. The body is held together by 6 regular screws, but you better have a screwdriver with a thin long shaft. This iFixit screwdriver, for example, is not long enough for some bolts and not thin enough for others. After removing the top cover, I undo 13 screws that hold the single board. Except 2 screws at the cartridge slot, all other screws are of the same size, don't worry about sorting them. Every one of these consoles has to have a dead insect inside. For me, it is a wasp. Removing inner connectors and the board is free. Power and reset buttons board is held by 2 screws. For whatever reason, the wires here are held by a zip tie. Controller ports are slotted between the main body and this black panel. Contacts don't look bad, but I'll clean them anyway. That's for the bottom half of the body shell. As for the top half, the cartridge door has 2 metal parts holding it from the inside and 1 black panel on the outside. This is where I picked up a side quest for this build. Everything is creaking loudly, giving me the feel of a cheap plastic toy, not the console I've always wanted. My immediate idea was that some silicone grease should fix the situation, but that's for later. Another source of screeching is the cartridge slot. It is held by 2 screws, nothing fancy here. You can wash it as is, but I want to tear everything down to eliminate the noise. There are 2 hooks and 2 axles. I bend them with a screwdriver and separate moving parts. Cartridge slot can be simply pulled off from the board. I don't see any debris and nothing looks damaged, so it must be just dirt. I'll take a closer look at it in a minute. There is no water damage on the main board, no leaking or burned components, all is looking good. Just all flux, as usual. And it seems that no one has been inside before me. This is what I was looking for when I searched on eBay. Flipping old consoles is a business nowadays. I'm also removing the heatsink from the voltage regulator. It will be in the way while I'll be working with the RGB mod. And I'd like to refresh the thermal paste here. But not totally thermal paste. I plan to desolder this whole modulator box and replace capacitors inside. They won't be used by RGB mod circuitry, I believe, but I don't want anything leaking and damaging the board, however unlikely it is. Now back to the cartridge slot. First thing I want to do is to clean it and see if this will help with reading games. I can be certain that the console works now. I have to do some fixing before doing some modding. There are a variety of fixes for the blinking red light. Changing the slot with the aftermarket one is the most common on eBay. For the most obvious reason, it is cheap, but people say that these slots don't last long. Another option is to replace the slot with a custom-made solution. But then again, among the issues are disk-like grip and deep scratches on cartridges. Third option is to either boil the connector to release the stress in the metal, or bend the pins with a dental pick to have stronger contact. You shouldn't be surprised if I tell you that there are stories about damaged pins or warped plastic after boiling. I personally considered boiling as the least invasive method, before I read about warped plastic. Now I want to check if simple cleaning will work. By simple, I mean good old soapy water and brush first, then IPA, and a contact cleaner. There are many of them, I have bought Deoxit. With all variety of forms, I will be using two testers with concentrated regular cleaner and gold protector. I also needed something thin to get to contacts and found these toothpicks to be the perfect tool. I spare you the soapy water section. For the IPA, I use a paper towel with a credit card. There is no visible dirt on the paper, perhaps the contacts are already clean enough, or maybe it is because I don't have any money on the card. The NES cleaning kit exists for this job, I'll get one next time. Then I apply a thin layer of the regular contact cleaner and brush contacts with the toothpick. Again, I don't see any dirt or debris coming with the toothpick, the slot got to be pretty clean already. Lastly, I use gold protector. Apply a thin layer and spread it with the brush. Before I wash the cartridge slot assembly, let me show you where that awful screeching comes from. It's springs scraping against plastic in their sockets. I start by thoroughly washing all parts, and then, as I've said, I have a dielectric grease left from my monitor adventure. I put a relatively thin layer of the grease on slots, springs and axles. Put the assembly together and voila, no screeching at all. This is for the slot. I also need to clean game cartridges. Undoing the screws, pulling the shell apart. The contacts aren't rusty or anything, but there is dirt and traces. I was skeptical about the special contact cleaners and will do a test on this cartridge. I will scrub one side with alcohol and another side with the cleaner. I wouldn't say that this experiment was very strict, but it looks like the cleaner worked slightly better. You can still see something that looks like dirt, but that's just light reflecting from traces. When people use custom cartridge slots, they are worsening these traces by having tighter contact. If you play the game only a few times, it can be okay, but I can't stand the idea of damaging the cartridge in exchange for a fast solution. Same can be said about used sandpaper, magic eraser sponges and alike. I did multiple approaches with the cleaner after. Thankfully I have time, I'm not reselling the games. In the very end I apply a layer of gold protector. I can't comment on what it does, if it does anything. We'll do an update in 10 years about how it holds. I washed the shell with regular water. The label here is made from paper and I don't want to peel it, as I did before for Game Boy cartridges. It definitely will be damaged. I tried to be quick with water, but the corners became slightly moist anyway. I put the cartridge together in hopes that the label will dry. I cleaned other games some days later, using the same steps. They all have much better contact states than the Darkwing games though. I can also say that the label eventually became normal. So in the end all's good, all cartridges have both contacts cleaned and their shells don't smell like old people. That's a win, but let's do the testing first. I put the now clean slot on the board and untouched all the inputs. Insert in clean cartridge and sure enough, the game works. I checked other games that I hadn't cleaned at this stage. Contra had artifacts and turtles couldn't be read at all. I have to assume then that cleaning must be done to both the slot and the games. So what are these new slots, sandpapering and boiling is all about then? This is the reason I searched for an original unit on eBay with no parts changed. But I will do an update on how this clean holds, maybe it won't last long, who knows. Now it's time to refurb the main board. There are 3 capacitors on it, and a variable amount of them in the modulator box. Removing caps from the main board is as easy as it gets, but to remove capacitor from the modulator, I need to desolder it first. It can be opened while it's attached to the main board. This is the hard part though, and I saw many people either abandoning the idea, replacing only the big capacitor, or even bending this small cover to get access to the insides. Well, for me it won't be a challenge, because I have a desoldering gun, and I can't recommend it enough if you see refurbishing electronics as a hobby. Anyway, I've cleaned solder points to avoid clogging the instrument, added some fresh solder and removed the box. The reason I set variable number of capacitors is because they are not marked on the underside of the PCB, and I couldn't find the modulator number to use Console 5 wiki as a reference. Now it's clear that I have this latest, probably, model with 4 caps. I removed all caps and voltage regulator, let me tell you why. There are a couple of potential problems with RGB mod and the NES. Apparently, the regulator can fail by itself because of an old age, but RGB mod has an option to be powered from the same voltage lines as the console is using, thus putting even more load on an already old regulator. As with all preventative measures, you don't have to do anything before it breaks, but what's the point of maintenance then? Regulators are very common, and you can pick one together with the capacitor kit. I was ordering caps and everything else from DGK and found this regulator. It has all types of protections, as the documentation says it's basically indestructible, plus it has slightly higher maximum output current, in case the mod needs any. When I finished with the initial cleaning of the box, I noticed that power socket contacts looks all black. I scrubbed the slot with the IPA first, then with Deoxit regular cleaner. Can't properly catch the result on camera, but the slot is now clean, no dark gunk is left on contacts. I first attached the new voltage regulator using MX4 thermal paste. Then capacitors. I always form their legs so they could be inserted straight. That looks neat and can help desolder them if there will be a need for that. Removing flux after all soldering work is done, so yes, even though half of the circuitry in here won't be used, the result is nice to look at, everything is clean, contacts are good, regulator and capacitors will be okay for years. On the main board I need to desolder the PPU chip. This again supposed to be a challenge, but not with the desoldering gun. After the chip is free, I need to put in its place this bracket, plus put new capacitors in the place of old ones. For anyone wondering, I am using Rubicon capacitors, because the board had Rubicon caps before, the modulator box had them too. I also noticed that many ceramic capacitors are bent. I can't think of any explanation for this, but I want them to be standing straight. When everything is looking cool, it's time to wash the board. I've lost the NTSC label to water, but everything else is clean, no dust or flux residue. I put the PPU in the new socket for testing. Solder back the modulator box and check if the console still works. It does, and RGB mod is what I am going to do next. Let me show you what I have bought. RGB mod includes some peripherals, but I will not be using any of them. There are ports, RGB, S-video and audio jack, additional voltage regulator and a capacitor for the color palette switch. I don't like the button combinations for switching colors, or for anything else if that matters. I think it takes away from the retro feel of the console. I will just use the first recommended color palette and that's it. Instead of the provided ports, I want to have Nintendo multi-out. Port is from the Laserbeard shop and plugs are from the console 5. As for the power regulator, from what I've read there is a problem with some editions of the NES power brick. It can output higher voltage than needed and stress the regulator. With the RGB mod the situation can worsen and I believe that's why an external regulator is supplied. Well, my power brick is fine, so I'm for the fewer wires and components inside the console. There are many more mods and improvements for the NES, including audio expansion mod and blue power LED. I don't want any of that, only the picture. Moving on some older console revisions one capacitor has to be bent down, as it will prevent the board mounting. On my 11th revision it is good. The mod board need pins to be soldered to it, before the PPU chip could be placed. But not only soldered, also cut. You can see how pins go through the board and point right into the PPU. This all, including capacitor bending, is because of the height restrictions. The console shielding won't allow placing parts differently, so the guy who created the mod says we have to keep everything as low profile as possible. I'm cutting one side of the pins array to 1/3 of their length, this way nothing will touch the chip. Easier way to solder the contacts is to insert them into the slot first, then put the board on top, tack a couple pins and solder them for good after you remove the board. As you can see, that's a very low profile. Next, I solder in the PPU. Got to be careful and not melt the plastic of the pins here, nothing to note otherwise. I wanted to do something interesting with the wires that connect the mod board to the console. I want to have all signals, RGB, S-Video and composite. In many video guides they are just soldered to the board, but I want to have my board detachable. Mainly to wash it first, and then connect it when it's clean. One option would be to use Walter Flat Flex cable kit, but it only replaces the output wires. I would still need two separate wires for the audio input. Plus, for some reason, I don't like the ribbon cable look in here, I want to have wires. I bought the same style of connectors as were included with the board. Here is the manufacturer name if you're interested. There are two issues with the connectors I bought. First is that audio input pads are located in between output pads. I have two angled sockets and if I want audio input to be separate I need to put them on the underside. Also what I didn't account for is the overall size of the construction. While nothing is connected it fits, but just barely. I was thinking I can bend the wires, but that didn't work. Let me show you how it was. I started with connectors being on top of the board and facing the edge. Audio connector, as I've said, I placed on the bottom. I'm using thin 26 gauge tinned copper silicone jumper wires, soldering them to the plug and using a heat shrinking tube for better look and isolation. Audio cables should be soldered either to the CPU legs or to the two resistors nearby, which is the same point on the schema, but are more convenient to solder to. For the output cables, I first measure how much length I need to connect to the multi-out port, then solder only those wires that I will use. This is where I realized that edge-facing connectors won't do, because wires can't bend that much. So I moved all the connectors on the underside. Not as good looking as I have hoped, but will do. Little appendix is for the audio input wires. That's only one side of the connectors. I need to attach wires to the Nintendo multi-out socket. We'll use this connection diagram that comes with the port. Almost time to test, but I need to put some jumpers first. I forgot about the J3 jumper right from the start. It is used to power the board. Closing J5 for the NTSC console, J10 for the jitter, this one is recommended by the creator of the mod. I won't be using the color palette switch, so most of the other jumpers will stay open. Putting a piece of wire between ground and 1D contact for the digital prime colors. I will watch the board off camera, but I can't test it yet, because I need cables. I have ordered 5 Nintendo plugs and plan to have separate cables for RGB, composite and S-video signals. But while I was browsing DigiCave parts, I couldn't find appropriate cable composition for RGB. You see, I want the audio line to be included in the cable, because I remember using one cable as a kit to connect to the TV, so that was my go-to solution. But with that composition I would need 3 coaxial wires for red, green and blue, 1 wire for the sync and 2 shielded wires for audio. Such cables may exist, but I couldn't find them on sale. I have read somewhere that VGA monitor cables has a lot of conductors inside, and that's what I decided to have for initial testing. I quickly slapped a Nintendo plug on one side, break out wires and plugs for various signals on another side and plug them all in. Good thing my monitor has 3 input channels. As I've mentioned, I forgot to close one jumper, J3, so there is no power fed to the mod board and no images displayed. That's an easy fix, turning on the console once again and here you have it, RGB mod is working perfectly. The S-Video, however, displays garbage. I've read that S-Video signal is the most sensitive to the interference, so no surprise, I don't have spare coax wires in this cable. Composite video works too, it looks very similar to the original console output. Console body is my next priority. I need to make a hole for the multi-out port. There is a small 3D printed part included with the port. You put it wherever you want and outline the place for the slot. Then make a hole with the tools you have on hand. I will be using a drill plus file and sandpaper for smoothing the edges. When the hole is done, I can wash all the body parts. They are slightly dusty but not yellow, so no retrobrighting will be needed. I only use soapy water, but the body looks like new. On the top half of the body I have a source of scratching, it's the cartridge slot cover. We'll use the same silicone grease here, applying it on all surfaces where plastic rubs against plastic or metal. The sound is completely gone, can't say for how long, but we'll appreciate the silence while it lasts. Next is the bottom half. I put the port into its place and secure it with another included bracket. Have to say that the port sits in its place pretty tight, no glue needed. Controller ports go back where they belong, start and reset buttons too. Together with the multi-out port, you can almost see why I wanted to have wires, instead of a ribbon cable. The surprising third part of the silencer side quest opened here. When I took 2 body parts together, I heard a very familiar sound. There is no moving parts, so that would be absolutely wrong and messy to use grease. But I had an idea. I got a piece of fabric tape, divided it into thin stripes and attached them to the edges. My thought was that when I put the top cover on, it will press the tape in small gaps that the shell has between top and bottom halves. I will show how it worked in a minute. Next I want to demonstrate how this whole detachable mod is supposed to work. I first take the mod board and attach it to the port. Then connect audio wires. Everything is a bit short here, I would have been better with a centimeter or 2 of additional wire length. Then I attach the mod board to the main console board. Shielding goes on top of the board and together they are placed inside the shell. All is easy and no soldering is required at weird angles. Controller and power button wires I connect back right after. First controller port is connected to the front socket on the board, second controller is connected to the side socket. Another thing to remember is that two long screws are for the back side of the cartridge slot. Then another piece of shielding and 11 screws to hold everything in place. I wonder why Nintendo engineers thought they need so many. Returning to the silencing tape, I was thinking that I need the top cover to hold the tape in place. But it turned out that the tape is very sticky, so I wrapped it around the edges. Closing the console, bolting everything up and done. Without screeching sounds, the console feels different, more heavy and even premium. That is the console body finished, but I need to take care of the controller too. Yes, the console had only one, still. It is dirty but all buttons work, so that's good. Inside there is some dirt but nothing criminal. I washed the body and buttons with soapy water, as usual, and here where things become complicated, a little. I tore off one of the conductor pads from silicone for the A-B button. Good thing replacements for them are available, but I've heard that aftermarket pads are much tougher and don't have the same feel as the original ones. I needed to order something anyway and decided to get a lot of 2 game pads from eBay, because I have only one and there is quite a few 2-player games. When I received the goods, I had my suspicions confirmed. You see, you have to be careful with the pads, and I was careful, so I thought maybe the carbon peels was already half torn off. And sure enough, one controller is perfectly fine, while another has a big hole. What's also interesting in this situation is that on the controller that came with the console, the shell doesn't have much wear, while the controller with the undamaged silicone pad, the place around the A button is very smooth, showing how often this button must have been smashed. Apply Deoxit contact cleaner here too, just in case. I assembled now clean and working gamepads and what do you know, more screeching. I've got good results with the fabric tape before and applying the same technique here, stripes for the edges and wrapping some on the cable. Now when all pieces of the system are silenced, I can definitely say it was so worth it. Oh, and yes, I also cleaned the power supply. It had some strange screws, not sure what they are called. There is an instrument for them for sale, but I use spinner bits that come with the regular iFixit kit. That's about it. Installation of the mod was easy and the picture is amazing. I don't have any good equipment to film the monitor, but hope you'll get the idea from the footage I have. RGB looks perfect. S-Video looks very close to the RGB, with maybe just slightly less detailed picture. Composite looks like composite, which is not inherently bad, don't get me wrong. For now, I will most likely be using S-Video. It does look good enough, there is clarity and some rounded edges. I will still need a set of good cables and external shielded speaker to replace one that's built in the monitor. But that's for the next time. Now I have some good old games to beat. Thanks for watching and see you in the next one.